Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Miss. So today we're continuing a series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and we got more turbo core testing for you today. We're going to be going over The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, because both of those have 30 frame per second patches, and when you apply those and use them on the turbo core, you basically get a locked 30 frame per second experience out of both Zelda games on the Nintendo 64, which were historically around 20 frames per second. Before we get too far involved, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel some kind of want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But it is absolutely amazing to see these two games run at 30 frames per second. The original frame rate was not a problem. Nintendo did a good job of making the game feel fluid and responsive at its native refresh rate, but honestly, getting another 10 frames out of this game, or what would amount to being a huge increase, is just so much more fun to see. And as Deku Scrub Link runs around the village here, you can just already tell in the motion just how much smoother this overall experience is. Watch it especially in the camera turns. You're going to see it is so fluid, and in a moment I will show you what it looks like at 20 frames per second as well. But as we come down into this underground dungeon area, you can just tell how much smoother of a time you're having here with a 30 frame per second patch. Now you can play the patched version on real Nintendo 64 hardware or the standard MiSTer FPGA core, but both of those are going to struggle a little bit when it tries to maintain the 30 frame per second target. Here on the turbo core, where we have horsepower to spare, you're going to get a much better experience and basically a locked 30 frames per second Majora's Mask. And that is absolutely amazing, because think about it this way, mathematically, jumping from 20 frames per second to 30 frames per second is a huge speed increase. This is not one of those, oh, you get 2 to 4 frames extra per second. This just makes the game feel completely new, completely unique, and a lot smoother of an overall experience. And it persists into the cutscenes as well. Some of the animations feel a little bit smoother, but it's definitely in the camera and the overall motion cadence on screen where you're going to really see that speed increase come to fruition. You might notice a little bit of wiggliness on the turbo core now and then with some textures in the background. It is very minimal, but do beware if you see a couple extra glitches here. That is because this is just a patched version of the game running on an upclock core. There's a tiny bit of sacrifice to get this overall effect, and I think that sacrifice is 100% totally worth it, because I'm definitely making my next Majora's Mask playthrough be on the 30 frame per second patch on the turbo core, and I'm probably long overdue for replaying this game anyway. The last time I completed it was when they released the 3DS remake, and honestly, as good as that version was, I still prefer the Nintendo 64 original. But leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think of that opinion. Now, as we get into large open spaces, this is where that extra horsepower and extra frame rate really comes to fruition. It is such a smoother experience in these big open expanses, and just like pretty much every other game, the more that the Nintendo 64 has to draw on the screen at once, textures, background, geometry, physics, all of the calculations, the more apt it is to actually slow down or not be able to maintain a proper frame rate. Here with the turbo core and the patch, you might see a tiny dip here and there, like a 1-second micro stutter, but for the most part, when you're running around and panning the camera, it is fluid and smooth. It is such a better experience than if you just played the stock version of the game. And do be aware that you do need this patch, because these games are locked frame rates. It doesn't matter if you play them on the turbo core without the patch, it will never give you an extra frame even if it has extra power, because the game engine and all of the code are locked to that specific frame rate. So you do need to use these patches and toggle them on in the beginning. But I especially love the cutscenes as well. It's so much smoother in the animations and all of the camera movements, because obviously everything is done in engine. There are no FMV sequences in this game. And again, in combat and battle, it's more fluid, it's more responsive, and you can definitely feel it. Your button inputs and overall actions in the game feel more responsive because you have an extra 10 frames per second that are being registered. And I will say that the sound, of course, is the exact same sound you would expect out of The Legend of Zelda, so I will give you a sample in just a second. But listen to the music, watch the cadence on the screen, pay attention to the camera movements and the animations. You're really going to see a gigantic difference in this overall patch. But here comes the music, and it is great, so enjoy, and I'll be right back. Absolutely incredible music, and I've always thought Majora's Mask has some of the best music in the overall Zelda universe. Leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think, but I've always preferred Majora's Mask over Ocarina of Time, but they are both incredible. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to toggle back to 20 frame per second mode. You can do this in the menu. You'll see 30 and then it goes away. Now watch as we come out of the start menu, watch the screen cadence and watch the absolute dip in the frame rate. We'll go back to 30 in just a moment. You can see that it's not as smooth, it's definitely stuttery. This is the normal experience you would get out of Majora's Mask if you were playing even on the Turbo core without the patch. Pop 30 frame per second mode back on and suddenly everything just gets smoother. This is a night and day difference. I can't stress enough just how much of a fix the 30 frame per second patch is with the Turbo core. It basically makes this feel like it's running at a similar speed to the 3DS remake, except it has all the original graphics and textures that you remember from first playing the game back in the day. So this is definitely, in my opinion, 100% the way to play Majora's Mask on MiSTer FPGA. Use the Turbo core, use the 30 frame per second patch. You're going to have an absolutely amazing time, and I will leave a link to the patcher below. It comes with all of the different patches. You just apply the games and you're off to the races. But of course, with The Legend of Zelda, there's not just Majora's Mask, there's also the Ocarina of Time, and this again is going to see a 30 frame per second patch as well as other options with the Redux version of this game. And as we walk around Hyrule Field here, just look again at how smooth and fluid this motion is in the camera pans and how everything is drawing, how Link moves forward and how the screen scrolls. It just feels buttery smooth. It would be nice to get a 60 frame per second version, but of course it is what it is. 30 frames per second is a hell of a lot better than 20 frames per second, and no one is going to complain about that. But do be aware, just like Majora, you need to toggle this option on. Once you start the game, you're going to have an options menu, and in there you're going to have a lot of different options with the Redux version of this game, including having the 30 frame per second patch on. So just make sure that you actually do this, or else you're going to be playing 20 frames per second the entire time and not realizing why. And that's because Andy D helped with some of these captures, and even he ended up with a 20 frame per second capture because he didn't realize you had to turn it on. But you'll see here again in combat, the smoothness of the overall animations, the camera movements, Link's movements, everything is just that much faster. And I can't stress enough, the one thing I can't show you in a video is the feel. When these games run at a higher frame rate, you get more responsive controls. And as we go through this little bit of a Kakariko village crawl here, you might see a tiny texture out of place. Just like Majora's Mask, bringing this game up to 30 frames per second can sometimes cause a little bit of graphical weirdness in the background, but honestly, if I didn't point it out to you, you might not ever notice it in actual gameplay. But what I do here is make sure I point things out to you so you can see the overall differences. So the next two shots are going to be comparisons, one after the other and one side by side, so you can get a sense of what this really does. So as we move into Link's village right here, this is running at 30 frames per second. Pay attention to the motion, pay attention to the camera movement, pay attention to Link's overall cadence and how the screen scrolls around. You can see the smoothness, you can see the fluidity, you can see the extra 10 frames in action here. Now we're going to move back over to the same scene, but we're going to be on the 20 frame per second version, and it's immediately able to be told that there is a difference in the frame rate. The screen cadence is different, the camera movements are a little bit choppier. This is what it would be like on real hardware without the patch, and this is what it's like on the Turbo core without the patch. You need the patch to get the result. But let's go to a side-by-side comparison of Hyrule Field. You're going to have Turbo on the left and stock on the right, and as the camera swings to the right here, you can immediately see the difference in the fluidity in this shot. Look at how the ground moves forward. You're feeling those extra 10 frames per second in the patch version on the Turbo core, and you can definitely feel their absence and see their absence on the right with either the stock core or the non-patched version of the game. Once you get into open areas, it's even more obvious just how different these two experiences are, and that is just some of the joy in these patches. Trust me when I say having an extra 10 frames per second in Ocarina of Time makes it a completely different experience, and in my opinion, a much better one. And because of course I gave you a sound sample of Majora's Mask, I'm going to give you a sound sample of Ocarina of Time as well. That way you can hear that the Turbo core with the patch doesn't do anything to the overall audio quality, because that is a question I get a lot. So 25 seconds and I'll be right back. Sounds like Ocarina of Time to me, and as we walk into the House of Skulltula here as well, again, you can just feel this different frame rate, and that is the most fun thing about MiSTer FPGA and Robert's work in general, as well as the people that create these patches. You can have the original experience on MiSTer FPGA, you can play on the stock core with an unpatched ROM, and you have that 20 frame per second locked look that Ocarina of Time would have shipped with back in the day. Or you can use the new Turbo core, apply a patch to a game, and suddenly you get 10 more frames per second out of Ocarina of Time in Majora's Mask. And I really think that this is definitely the way to play, but tell me down below which one you prefer. Having seen basically the entire video, do you like the look of these two games at their native 20 frame per second cap, or do you like seeing the 10 more frames per second? Because I know people are definitely going to debate which one is better, but the great part is we get two options. But if I still had to say one game that was most improved by the patch and the Turbo core, I'm going to go with Majora's Mask. But this was a later stage game, definitely has better graphics than Ocarina of Time, and with the 30 frame per second patch and the Turbo core, it just feels like it's holding up a little bit better. I never thought that Majora's Mask was unplayable on Nintendo 64. It definitely had a lower frame rate, but the game just becomes that much more fun when all of that fluidity comes into play as well. And it just has such a unique and interesting story. Every single time I play this game, I'm just compelled to want to play it more, and even watching this footage and going through the edit, it really makes me want to sit down and give Majora's Mask one more playthrough, at least in the 2020s. I'll probably revisit it again in the 2030s, and shockingly, that's not as far away as we all think. But that is the situation with these two games. Apply some patches, use them on the Turbo core, and suddenly Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time become 30 frame per second games. And if there's other games you want to see tested in this Turbo specific series, leave me a comment down below, because I've gone through a lot, but I know there's still some out there, and if you guys want to see anything in particular, I am all ears. But go ahead and flare up the Turbo core, the link is in the description for the patcher. Apply the Redux patches for Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, toggle on 30 frame per second mode, and get a completely new, unique, and different experience out of two of Nintendo's best games. Sure that we're done, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.